So we're approaching the local village. This is a village graveyard. It's the village my mum lives in, and obviously I do because I live with her now. Been a wedding, obviously. So it's not the most peaceful of graveyards because obviously it's by a main road, but in a lot of ways it reminds me of a graveyard I used to go to when I lived up in Cumbria, and for about a period of 18 months I used to work in a metaphysical shop one day a week in a little town called Corbridge, and this graveyard really reminds me of the one up there. Corbridge was in the northeast, and this graveyard really reminds me of it because it was a graveyard slap in the middle of Corbridge, whereas this one's right next to the A6, busy trunk road that is busy. But yes, I thought some blackbirds here, thought I'd have a look round. That's one plant we have a lot of in this area, holly. We're located here in East Cheshire. I just thought I'd have a walk around the graveyard, and it's handy. I mean, graveyard dirt is something I do work with, but I really don't need any because when I lived up in Cumbria, there was a 12th, 13th century graveyard up there by an ancient priory where I gathered absolutely loads of graveyard dirt, which I usually get from the mole hills on top of the graves, because the moles do the digging, bring up the dirt, and I collect it. And so I've got jars full of it, so I don't really need any from here. But graveyard dirt could pertain as to dirt from a particular grave. If you wanted to work with, say, an ancestor, you'd work with an ancestor's grave dirt. And most people familiar with it will know the story, know the gist. But let's say that's the royal we, me and my dog, just having a stroll round. And look at these houses here that look onto the graveyard. I wouldn't mind having a house that looked onto a graveyard. It really wouldn't bother me because I think they're very peaceful places rather than scary. But when my husband was alive, I'd seen a house that was, again, like this, not here up in Cumbria, and it was kind of over a graveyard, but not in the grounds of it. And my husband was like, "You're not buying that, you're not buying that," and of course I didn't. But now I probably would, but of course it depends on whether you like the house or not. It's not so much the location, it's whether the house fits as well. But yeah, it's a nice little graveyard, this, for the village, still in use, and I'm just having a wander round. A lot of pagans and witches do work with graveyards or come into them to work. One thing I'm always mindful of when I come into a graveyard, regardless of where that graveyard is located, whether it's in the big city centre or whether it's in the middle of nowhere, I always am mindful that the graveyard grim, that is the spirit of the graveyard, the guardian of this graveyard, is ever present. So I don't always ask the grim, can I come into the graveyard? I would if I was going to do some working in the graveyard, if I was going to do a ritual here of any kind, be it for an ancestor or to collect graveyard dirt, then yeah, I would be asking the graveyard grim. And the graveyard grim is it's either the eldest resident in the graveyard. That is the first person actually buried on that graveyard, or more often than not it was a black dog that was buried in the graveyard, the first one. I mean, I don't think this will happen now, but in the 1500s and maybe around that time, maybe even into the 1800s, I don't know, when a graveyard was constructed, the first burial would be of a black dog. And I'm wondering if that's where the root of the folklore of the black dog comes from. That'd be interesting. But yes, graveyard grims should be respected because they do guard this place. They are, and I do feel that the graveyard grim here, I feel its energy. I say it, not to be derogatory or rude, but it doesn't really have a male or a female essence to it. But I do feel the grim here, and it's kind of got like a light, almost cheeky, chappy kind of energy to it. That's what I pick up with this grim. And when I think of describing it, laissez-faire, the words laissez-faire come to mind. But I know he's around, and I think that because I'm saying he now, but acknowledging the graveyard grim is always nice, because we acknowledge the dead in the graveyard. We acknowledge them, those that, like for example, a relative that's buried in a graveyard. And it's nice, I think, to acknowledge the spirits of the place as well. So for me, the spirit of this place is definitely the graveyard grim. Definitely. And so I want to acknowledge that. Now, I would like to visit my ancestors' graves, but they're right in the city centre of Manchester. Well, about a couple of miles out, at a place called Southern Cemetery. The trouble is, it's getting down there, it's driving very busy roads, and it's, with everything, it's parking. But it would be great to go. But it's such a vast cemetery. I don't know where I'd begin to find my ancestors' graves. That's lovely, with the statue of the Virgin, a little cherubim. But yeah, walking around here is nice because it gives you a sense that, alright, these people here are now at rest, but they're remembered. And even if the relatives of people in this graveyard are long dead themselves, they still have a sense of presence here. And the grim will spiritually guard the people that are contained within this graveyard. So it's nice, really, to think like that, to think about that. So yeah, those are my thoughts on graveyards and cemeteries. I mean, I don't think anyway I would use graveyard dirt from this particular graveyard, because it's much too close to a main road. People can see. There's houses all around. I would go to somewhere more remote. But as I say, that's one thing I don't need, is graveyard dirt. So that's my ramble. I've been on for nearly 10 minutes, so I'm going to shoot off. So yeah, hope you're all enjoying the summer. Nice day and a nice walk along the canal. And I thought I'd talk about a hedgerow herb or plant that we're approaching. And it is this one, which is known as Ragwort or ragweed. And the leaves of it remind me, very similar to rue leaves. And the head, when this plant goes to seed, it goes fluffy like that, but that's not ragwort, that's a different plant. And I thought I'd do a little talk about this plant. It's vibrant in the summer months. Of course, there's some over there as well. And it isn't good for horses, and it's poisonous to all mammals. But ragwort is said to be loved by bees and butterflies, although there aren't any around it today. Now in Ireland, it was thought that ragwort was used by the fairies for transport, kind of a bit like a broomstick really, and is also known as staggerweed because it's poisonous to, well, cattle and horses, and I think they do try to avoid it. It is said if you pull it up, you need to apologise to the fairies because they will take you away. Now, ragwort is also known as stinking willy because it has a rather unpleasant odour to it. Now, the Scottish poem and bard Robbie Burns did a folk poem about ragwort. Let warlocks grim and withered hags tell how we on ragweed nags. They skim the mirrors on dizzy crags wi' wicked speed. Now it is said also that in the West Country witches rode on ragwort, again I suppose as an alternative to a broomstick. Ragwort could be used in magic or ritual connected to the fairies, so you could use this in fairy magic because it does have a strong connection with the fae. It can also be used in release and letting go workings as well because of its properties. And finally, you can also use ragwort in cursing and binding spells against those who speak falsely, in other words, liars. So I thought that would be a little bit of a talk about ragwort, and I do hope you've enjoyed it, and cheerio for now. I had to film this as well. I've just come down from that quarry bit. What? This has a really enchanted feel to it. And it's almost like an archway there with the trees. I just wanted to do a quick clip of this. It has a real, I don't know, it's got a very nice energy here. And it almost feels like an enchanted forest. It's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. So I'm going to wander the path and see where it brings.